start by taking a pulse of the audience for the benefit of my panelists. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to make it as dynamic and interactive as possible. We'll take a pulse, and then we're going to set the stage. And the way we are going to do that is we're going to tell you what's happening in the life science industry in general. So what are the trends in 2017 that you as entrepreneurs need to know as you go out and fundraise? And then we are going to ask the panelists in the global spirit of this panel. We're going to contrast even the definitions of what healthcare means in the US versus India, and anybody that's from a different country, please feel free to ask us questions that may be more pertinent to those geographical locations. We might not have the answers to everything, but we're going to do our darned best. So I'm going to start with a pulse. We're going to start with definitions of healthcare. Would everybody that is in healthcare therapeutics and drug development, please raise your hands. Could you raise them a little bit higher? Thank you. Okay, and then everybody that is in healthcare services. So a little bit higher, please. Thank you. Not enough breakfast. So did the ones who are in digital health also put up your hands for healthcare service? Entirely different spectrum, okay? Did we leave out anything? Diagnostics? Wow. Okay.
Medical devices.
Sorry, the diagnostics, I didn't get a count yet. The diagnostics, please. Yeah. And the devices, please. Excellent. Thank you so much. So very, very beautiful spread across the sectors. We'll try to deal with that. The data that I will show you is all comprehensive, so it includes companies in all these sectors. As we delve into India, we'll see how that might be different for each of these situations. Another pulse to the audience, please. Could you tell me how many of you have raised seed money so far? Thank you. How many have raised institutional money as defined by anything above a Series A? Yes, sir. Are you the only one in the audience? Yes. Thank you. Okay, so here's what we're seeing, and this is data from the National Venture Capital Association. So it includes all these different sectors that each of you belong to, and we'll talk about the impact of these trends in the industry in what is happening as you go out to either raise money or grow your companies. So we are seeing more capital in fewer deals, and I'm going to show you data numbers, but let's stick with the trends. So we are seeing a smaller number of deals happening, but we are seeing more amount of money going into smaller number of deals. So we'll talk about what that means as a company for you as you prepare your data packages to go out and raise institutional money, because this is clearly being pushed beyond what we've generally seen. Another interesting trend is the median age of companies is now increased by a year. So what does that mean? We are highlighting the paucity of early stage capital in the industry. And we're going to talk about alternate business models. We have here Tiffany, who comes from an accelerator model. Dr. Ramesh previously alluded to the fact that grant financing is not very common here. It's very common for us. So you have nice leverage happening, and it's one thing to take care of because you have to bootstrap yourself for much longer now. We'll give you numbers on that. The capital round sizes are increasing, so there is a huge amount of appetite for risky ventures, actually. That has increased because the markets have done so well that investors will put more capital at risk. And we'll speak to what Neeraj's background here is, because they tend to do a lot of late-stage deals as well. Investing in the life sciences, so for all of you that have pledged your lives to a sector that's highly regulated, that has many stakeholders, and that takes forever to get to market. Good news for you is that, against our Facebook and Lyft and Ubers and all this world, life sciences still continues to be a very interesting sector for investing. We've seen deal size increase, so those are now above 50 million. They're accounting for almost 65% of the deals. Average time to exit, this is very important for you because the average time to exit is now increased to 6 years. That means investors like this have to stay longer in your investments, and we're going to talk about What are they looking for in entrepreneurs like you, knowing that their money is going to be stuck for the next 6 to 7 years, because that's the median size that we are seeing. The next slide, please. Yes, sure. I can. I just need to put a disclaimer, but I'll make sure that you get them. Is that okay? Okay. No, no worries. No, I'll make sure you'll all have that. I just need to. Okay, so this, I just want to give you numbers, and that's why we insisted on this slide, because I think you can't run an investment panel without having numbers to speak to. So what you're looking at is 2017. These are deals. Can you see the dip in the number of deals? So fewer deals got done, but that is third quarter data. We are already at 61 million. Next slide, please. So the same thing, you look at life sciences, number of deals going dramatically down. What does that mean for you? It means you are in a very, very competitive environment. So as you go to each of these investors to pitch, please know that your competition has increased many, many fold, because those number of deals have gone down. But these very investors will spend time with you, but will put more amount of capital to work. Next slide, please. So the median age, we spoke about this. Do you see that the median age of companies now raising seed financing is now 2.5 years? And we'll have investors from India comment on whether they're seeing the same trends over here, or whether this is more a US-centric trend. We're also seeing the same in Series A. Companies that are raising Series A financings now have to show a huge, much more data. So we're going to talk about, those of you in digital health, we'll talk about what pre-revenue versus revenue companies look like. Next slide. Deal size increasing. The good news is, if you can power through this all, there is more capital to work. So there's the rise of the super angels, so more angels banding together to put more money to work, both in your seed and in your Series A. Okay, we're going to take a breath here, because that's a lot of data, and then I am going to ask my fellow panelists to please address a lot of things. We'll start with, Dr. Ramesh, I'll start with you. If you could talk about the nature of the entrepreneurs that is pitching to you and the size of deals that they come to you at, so the minimum size and the maximum size of your deals, that would help us get a flavor. We'll have Tiffany contrast with a US perspective, and then Rich.
Sure. Before I do that, coming to the definitions,
yes.
India partners invest in healthcare and technology companies. I look after the healthcare. When we say healthcare, in this fund, we are not doing the life sciences, and we are doing mostly the digital health, medical devices, little bit AI in healthcare. So those are the three areas we are focusing on. And being India partners, being a seed stage or a pre-series A, we get most of our 99% of the deals we get are no revenue companies actually. We even go at the concept stage itself. Obviously that applies to digital health and to AI, but definitely when it comes to medical devices, we definitely expect some kind of a proof of concept or a small pilot or a demo. Maybe at the same time I will allude to your question, the early stage, even the US, we hardly see venture capitalists going to early stage companies. There, because the grant mechanisms is very robust. Fortunately in this country, last 3 to 5 years, or I would say 3 to 4 years, there has been a significant increase in the grant mechanism. One major initiative is from the government of India, an organization called BIRAC, B-I-R-A-C. They have multiple grants. So almost per year, we are giving 80 grants per year in the range of 50 lakhs, maybe $100,000. And parallel to the BIRAC, we also see the Wellcome Foundation being very active here. We also see the Indo-US Science Foundation, a partnership between the Indian government and the US government. Probably the fourth grant mechanism is the Canadian Grant Challenges, which is reasonably a lot of Indian investors, entrepreneurs have access to. So my strong pitch to the entrepreneurs, especially from the Indian subcontinent, early stage equity is not the only route. please use these grant mechanisms. One way you are not diluting yourselves.
Right.
At the same time, you have access to these grants because all these grant funding agencies, being the early years, they're very liberal in giving these grants. The delays also are not much. I'm not sure what the delays in the Western world. In 6 months' time from the day you make the call to the final announcement and dispersal of the money is less than 4 to 6 months actually.
So you do better than so the SBIR averages 9 months from the time you put in a proposal to okay.
Yes. So here is a call for grants a particular day, and once the deadline is over, 4 to 6 months, the entrepreneurs get their money. Yeah, I don't know whether I answered this question.
No, that's perfect. I'm going to pulse the audience always. How many of you have applied for grant financing? Nice. Okay. Tiffany, do you want to comment on the same thing? The size of events, how early can an entrepreneur come to you and how late?
So GCMI was set up as a nonprofit initially. We opened about 6 years ago. And so we have not historically given out funding, but we've worked with folks who do have funding to help them design, build, test, and commercialize, and really understand what will be required and how much capital they'll need to raise in order to get through a regulatory body. Based on that experience, we know now if we have the right team at the right time, we can really accelerate that process. By the right team, I mean they're coachable, that they'll really work in a collaborative effort and lean into proper product development for medtech. And at the right time, I mean that they have not gone too far down the pathway where they've made so many mistakes that it's going to be so costly to have to go back and recreate that. So based on that and some of the validation we've gotten from the market, we're starting to raise a $100 million early stage fund. Because as in the United States, as you've highlighted, there's a tremendous lack of early stage capital in the United States for a host of reasons, right? Kind of post-bubble, there were issues with the FDA and a tremendous amount of uncertainty there. And then we got into healthcare reform. And so it just meant that 6.4 years to exit was more like 10 plus years, right? And we're seeing that correct itself a bit, but there's still the institutional investors and the strategic investors are investing later and later. They want to see the technology de-risked, the regulatory de-risked, and all of the commercial de-risked. So that there's payers for it there's reimbursement models, and they will invest large sums of capital to help grow and scale those companies, but that still leaves a huge gap in early stage medtech. And so that's where we're really going to be addressing our fund, is in the seed and Series A for those technologies that we feel we can really accelerate through to initial sales, and then partner with the larger institutional investors during that phase to really understand what are the critical milestones from a commercialization, from a sales target, market penetration. What do they want to see to put in that first round of true institutional Series B type activity?
Okay, very helpful. Neeraj, and given the size and the magnitude of Carlyle, could you speak to us and the audience a little bit about what, first of all, how early you come in, and then do you want that they've raised an institutional round before you begin to see them, or would you also invest in companies that are non-dilutively funded and you are the first institutional investor?
Sure. So as you said, Carlyle we focus more on growth and later stage deals. My experience has been more on healthcare services. So I've invested in Apollo Hospital, which is one of the largest hospital chains in the country, Medanta, which is a tertiary care in Delhi, and then Metropolis, which is a diagnostic chain out of Bombay. So, and maybe just stepping back to put India in context, right? Because the slide you showed was the US. I think if you look at India, if you look at early stage activity in healthcare, it's about 40 to 45% is in healthcare services. That is still the predominant part of the market. Another 25-30% is healthcare tech, which is basically healthcare IT, right? It's not really devices. So that's another 25%, and there's about 15% which is going in pharma and another 10-15% in biotech. So that's the landscape in India. And to the point Dr. Ramesh made, there's very little true early stage funding happening in biotech. There's early stage funding happening on the services side, but beyond that, it hasn't happened in India because the seasoned pool of entrepreneurs who can invest, or the seasoned pool of ex-executives who can invest in the space, is still just developing. If you look at it from our landscape on the later stage side, we are focusing a lot more on services. And I guess what would define a good investment opportunity for us is the thesis for healthcare services for us in India is that you need to provide good or high quality care at affordable prices to a very large populace, right? So how do you get to do that? You need to have a low capex model or a tier 2, tier 3 city model which actually works on a unit economic basis. So what we tend to look at in the deals, the bigger the scale, the better, because obviously that has de-risked a lot of what you would, similar to what you were saying, what you would look at in a business. But we really focus a lot on, is there a unit economic model which has got proven, right? So if you're looking at dialysis centers, if you're looking at pathology chains, if you're looking at daycare surgeries, right? If you're looking at home care, is there some unit economic model which has been proven? So then the additional capital we put in is scaling a proven model. I think we're less, especially on the services side, less likely to take a punt that this model hasn't worked. But when you put in more capital, some of the unit economics will change. We're not as, profitable is great, but we're not as fixated on a company being profitable. We take a negative EBITDA company if they can show that over a 2-3 year period they can develop, the return on capital becomes positive or trends into positive unit economics. That bet we're willing to make, but there has to be some proof point to show that.
Okay, so because I think whenever I sit in the audience and my concern is not addressed, I'm always upset. So I'm going to break this routine a little bit and allow for your psychic. I'm going to allow just for 2 questions so we don't derail it entirely, but please go ahead.
It seems to me that you're a later stage investor, so that's great, but that's not this audience. So this audience is really early stage.
Right.
Is there something that you would suggest or you would tell them how they could help themselves in terms of finding the dollar? We're talking about the U.S. market, so that's not that easy to access from India. So maybe you could speak to how you might do that, or do you need to come to the U.S.? Do you need to establish a presence? Do you need to establish an entity in the U.S.? What would you recommend? There's lots of things you might speak to in that regard.
Absolutely, and I'd ask the audience to please do that. It's very different, very difficult when you're doing kind of a global investment thing to kind of this thing. So I can take a stab at it and ask you to please. So I will say that when we were a fund, we ran a huge fund. We invested in India. So actually our investments here is in Strand, in Bangalore, and Bioimaging is cross-border. I would tell every entrepreneur, if you're looking for capital that is outside the US, please research your venture group. So I'm assuming that if you're doing institutional financing, you're looking to raise venture capital, please look at the portfolios. Just like they diligence you, you diligence them. You make sure that they have somebody on their team that understands India. You don't really need to set up an office there. We never mandated that for any of the investments. But you do need to find a champion there who understands, because at the end of the day, if you're an Indian company, your product would have been initially customized to the local market, then you might have a global reach. So that's one way, and it's always networking, right? I mean, you're always trying to reach, you're always trying to sell. I'll ask and then I can come back to the question and ask my...
Sure. I think it's a very interesting question. I'll give an analogy.
Sure.
One of our previous funds, we have an interesting company, a fabulous product. They're almost ready with the pre-production pilots. It's a ventilator company, an ICU grade ventilator at 1/6 the cost. The founder is from US. He is a professor, part-time professor at Stanford. Some part of the research is being done in Bangalore. No teams, all distributed like a just-in-time or lean manufacturing. The manufacturing is happening in Singapore. The problem the entrepreneur is facing, Indian investors want the team to be in India. The US investors, because that market is India, the US investors are saying, oh, your market is in India, we don't have much access to. So that's a dilemma you may face. But in general, even though US venture capitalists may be willing to look at Indian or any other overseas, predominantly venture capitalism is always local. So I think the chance of you getting an investor from an Indian VC ecosystem is far higher than you able to get a overseas VC investor, is my experience after probably 7 to 8 years.
Are you familiar with Y Combinator?
Yes.
Or the International Accelerator?
Yes.
Would you recommend that to this audience?
So that is a great point. I also see Kavita is in the audience, and she's one who's done the cross-border model. But yes, so incubators and accelerators, I'm going to let Tiffany speak about it. So let's talk about new asset classes of financing, right? So accelerators came up, and a lot of companies, you don't have to be from India, you can be anywhere from ex-US. That is the launch pad. So you launch yourself there, and then you expose yourself to the network. So that is the new model that's coming. And Tiffany, maybe you want to speak about it. I know your model is US-centric, so we'll keep it in mind because of this audience, but speak to the value of having an accelerator probably.
And I'd be careful with the accelerator models because they're so different. And so, Y Combinator, for example, I don't know if that's the best for therapeutics and devices. It may be for healthcare services and software. I'll go back a minute to the question for young entrepreneurs, first-timers in healthcare and life sciences. And I'm really coming from a medical device and diagnostic standpoint. I think regardless of what country you live in, if you are at a concept, to really have a fundamental, to do your homework on the potential investors, to really understand what you're trying to accomplish, understand what is the unmet clinical need you're addressing, how large is that market, what is your solution, what does the intellectual property landscape look like, not only in your country, but on a global scale. And going through that checklist, you want to make sure that you're addressing a large enough market and that someone's willing to pay for it on the back end. Getting broader stakeholder, so it really doesn't matter whether you're here or in Europe or in the US, those that fundamental analytics of making that business model work, I think will be the same regardless. As it relates to accelerators, our model is focused on the U.S. And what we've seen historically is, and I think this goes across all countries where there's sources of non-dilutive funding. So for those of you who are scientists who have some grant funding and are developing your idea, a lot of times scientists will de-risk their technology in a way that's interesting to you from a scientific standpoint, but it may not have any bearing on the regulatory pathway, or by the time you get to the institutional guys, they're like, I don't care about that. You really haven't de-risked your technology in a way that's going to be relevant to the market. And so it's about really engaging with the investors in the private sector, the angel, the institutionals, and really defining what are the critical milestones that you need to address over a 6 to 12 month period of time that are going to position you in the best possible way for that first round of private capital. And so that's what we're doing with our accelerator model. It's not a cohort based. It's not we don't do boot camps or classes. It's very prescriptive. Every team is different. Every technology is different. And so very specifically identifying what are those milestones. What we're seeing a lot of strategics and investors want to see is that proof of concept. And you mentioned the pilot, but does your technology work? It's one thing to get up and on the stage and do a pitch competition and have a great slide that shows your technology or your device, a beautiful CAD drawing, maybe have a 3D prototype. But if it doesn't work, you really don't have anything. So really focusing on getting to that final design of something that you can prove and the verification and validation exercises of that. And then the other aspect is really understanding who your customer is, and that's going to vary from country to country. In the U.S., historically it's been, hey, if I'm selling to an orthopedic surgeon, if I've got his or her input, I'm good to go. And now it's the customer is not only that surgeon, but the scrub tech, the nurse, the CFO, the value analysis committee for that hospital. And so really understanding what all the pain points are in all of the decision makers who are going into that technology, and make sure that you're through the development process addressing that. So, you know, the accelerator model definitely works, helps access that broader ecosystem. I would just caution on the different models out there.
On the accelerators, probably specific information to India, IKP Hyderabad and CCamp Bangalore have specific accelerators specifically for medical devices and life sciences. And I won't be surprised if we see Venture Circle Pune, one more may come up. So there are more dedicated accelerators, unlike the Y Combinators, probably their expertise to help life sciences.
You really want to work with people who understand life sciences and the nuances between therapeutics, diagnostics, devices, and health IT.
Right. Just one clarification, though, Y Combinator did get into the life sciences and has built out that practice. But to Dr. Ramesh's point, if you're focused on, then it might be best, because incubators and accelerators are so focused on early stage companies, it's best to keep those local, unless you're planning international expansions, at which point you then start to look at accelerators abroad. Neeraj, did you want to comment? Or should we?
So I was going to talk about early stage funding on the services side, and I think sort of looking at it from two lenses. One is for companies which have actually got late stage, they've gone through early stage funding at some point, right? So what have they done well to get to that late stage funding? And then I previously worked at Accel, which is a early stage fund. If you look at generic drugs, there are different brands which are popular in different markets, right? So sometimes I think the mistake people make is you eventually want to have the pan-India solution, but even just taking a narrow market, you take South India, you take Northeast India, you take North India, those itself are a big enough opportunity set to start with. That's one. I think secondly is you have to, as was said earlier, there's a paucity of early stage capital in this country, which is not a helpful statement to make, but I guess the point is that have a business plan which gets you to some tangible milestone, assuming a buffer where you have an execution buffer that most likely will slip by about 30-40%. With your own funding, whatever resources you have, because you really get penalized in that early stage funding if you haven't hit any major milestone. It's extremely dilutive to the shareholders. That's the second point. The third is, I would tell you, the bricks and mortar companies who are doing services today are struggling with how to address digital health, and they're all trying to place bets in startup companies. They do not have the DNA, the organizational DNA, to actually attack those markets. So whether you talk about for the Indian context, the market is very rudimentary, right? Even today, it'll be difficult to get your blood test reports with some sort of analytic capability on that from your providers, right? So a company which can do that will most probably get funding from one of the larger diagnostic chains. If you think about telemedicine, the established bricks and mortar hospital chains will invest behind that. So I think that strategic capital, as long as you don't get too much in bed with that particular partner, as an avenue which I think has been untapped so far, and there are significant resources lying within those bricks and mortar companies.
And just give me 30 seconds, so I'll come to. And one other last piece of advice is your user proceeds. When you look at your product pipeline, understand whether it's a product that serves the domestic market or the international markets, right? Because if it serves the domestic markets, you're well served by your investors here. If it's international markets, you can start quoting those asset class much earlier. I'm going to have the panel address this, and then we're going to go on and continue, and I'm going to ask people to keep questions a little bit.
I think from a services standpoint, we've looked at Nepal in the past. For our tertiary and quaternary care hospitals, it's more to have a sort of a feeder clinic there by which we can get patients in, right? So we're using telemedicine and then going for the high-end procedures. So that has been the play on the hospital side. For pathology, to be honest, we haven't looked at it, primarily because, my point earlier, the regional brands are so strong, right? This is still very much a consumer-centric business where the doctor recommends a particular chain, and without having that doctor connect and the brand connect in a new country for pathology, it's hard to make that play. But we are definitely doing it on the hospital side, but more as a sourcing mechanism for patients.
Maybe I may have a quick comment.
Sure.
We are a very product-focused venture capital fund. No discredit your statement. We are into hospitals, diagnostic centers, telehealth, digital health, and all that. Each of that's such a large area. Even if Neeraj looks at it, if you are looking at a 100-bed hospitals in districts, 10 hospitals, he may be willing to look at it. If you say, I'll do diagnostics, I'll do hospitals, I'll do molecular diagnostics, I'll do a digital health, you're all over. On the other hand, if you say I will do a telehealth platform exclusively for dermatologists, I always feel, why should a doctor visit a dermatologist when all the way, I'm seeing some of the cameras, the young ladies are doing, the quality of the resolution is so fabulous. So a teledermatology is ripe for disruption, like the teleradiology which already we have. That kind of focused healthcare is such a broad area. Probably 18% of the entire US GDP goes into healthcare. So healthcare is not one bucket, there are hundreds of opportunities. I'll give one small example. One company in Pune built a small bot which sits on an EMR to help doctors navigate the very difficult, the UI of the best HIS platform in US, I believe, is hopeless. So doctors get bogged down, they don't want to open multiple screens. He has put a small bot to open a particular chart he wants, and it has been acquired by Athena Health for $65 million. And one more company out of Chicago area, Outcomes Health, patients are waiting in the outpatient area for 30 minutes to 1 hour, even in the United States. In India, they wait for 3-4 hours waiting for a doctor. So how do I utilize the patient's time to educate the patient so well by videos? Their outcomes will be better. When they go into a doctor, they forget everything. They don't know what to ask the question. They built a $4 billion valuation company just on that focused product. So my advice to the entrepreneurs is be very focused. Spend enough time with the customers, patients, doctors, hospital administrators. Find the real pain point and try to solve that. There are enough pain points in healthcare to be solved.
And I think you did a good job calling attention to Nepal. I think the advice is, if you focus on this and sell a particular value proposition, it might be more palatable, but good job in highlighting it. So I'm going to pause here and ask my panelists if this is okay. I think it's a good way to do too, right? Because we are feeling the pulse. Okay, very patient. Okay.
I'm actually from Bangladesh. So I want to talk a bit off topic. Mental health is being something very interesting globally, and many startups are coming up on mental health and mental well-being. So if you can share what's the global scenario, and if you are interested investors are interested to invest on mental health startups as well.
I can start. I can unfortunately not take the name of the company. And that is a global problem, right? So then if you look at mental health as this thing and look at the different areas, so the sector that got traction in mental health last year was actually behavioral patterns to predict whether, for example, you're suffering from something as much as depression. Those kind of startups that use big data analytics to look at mental health got a splurge of funding last year. Now, if you were developing a product for that, that's going to be tougher, and it will follow the same challenges of drug development. But so when you pick an area, I think it's also important to pick kind of what sector you want to do.
Maybe on that, 2 examples I can give. One was a published information from Stanford, WOBOT, W-O-E-B-O-T. It's a chatbot for behavioral therapy. You must be referring to that. It has been proven to be superior to a conventional behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, the CBT. So a chatbot which is equal or superior to a conventional therapy, and I'm not sure whether it's funded. There's one more company out of Bangalore on the same bot for mental illnesses, got funded $1 million actually. So you're on the dot. So if you can see where they are and if there's any other opportunity.
Sorry, may I just, lady, yes, please.
I'm a nurse and researcher, and my company focuses on improving lives for cancer patients. My question for you is this: a lot of times when you come from a technical expertise, you may be 80 or 90% there in terms of having the full package, and you might have 10 or 20% missing to get you to that perfect plan for you to be ready for investment. So when we are at that point, what kind of support do you think investors can provide to help us bridge that 10% gap on the business side? Or do you have any advice for us in terms of where we can go to understand and address those issues? For example, about where the money is in healthcare, where the money is being spent, how do we price it? Those are some of the complicated questions which don't have easy access to information for people who are not invested.
I think that's where the incubators and accelerator models come in wherever you are, and finding those organizations in your community that have curated investors and experienced executives who have been there and done that, and can help you walk through that gap analysis to understand, you may think you're 80% there, but in reality, you could be 50% there, right? So from a scientist standpoint, you could be 80 or 90% there. But they can help you, and I would encourage everyone to engage in those conversations earlier rather than later, to understand what the challenges are going to be and what are the resources and areas of expertise. This is not, life sciences is not an individual sport. It is very much a team sport, and it truly takes a village to get something across that's going to benefit patients. So the earlier you can recognize that and access and just be open to the coaching and the advice and working with those folks. But a lot of places now, from an economic development standpoint, have those local resources to help you connect with mentors and executives who have done that before.
I think one other low-cost way of building out your network is advisory boards, right? Because the reality, if you go to institutional capital, 80% there, they will take, having being an institutional investor myself, you take a big slug of equity to get you to that 100%. So using advisory boards where you're giving away some equity, but the bar is relatively low, is actually a very valuable way of building out the network, especially in a country like India where the doctor community is still quite closed. And I'm not sure what business you're in, but depending on, the doctors carry pretty large brands, and getting them affiliated with your business actually helps open up a number of different channels. So I've seen a couple of startups do that successfully. On the mental health point, actually, I've seen some interesting models there as well, because it lends itself to online. In a country like India, where people are quite, the societal implications are quite strong, you see the online model is actually penetrating. You see corporates in India beginning to have mental health as one of the benefits which they're providing their employees. And I've seen some interesting companies doing both online with some bricks and mortar facilities, so people know you're credible, but then they will go online to actually subscribe to the help.
Sure. And Sangeeta, I'm going to come at your question and this is probably not just for Sangeeta, but every entrepreneur. It's also part of building your company is also about negotiating your financing, right? So let's say you have a data package that's 80% ready, and you have this 20% data that you absolutely have to get, and you're going to have to give up something because somebody's going to have to put in that money to fund, to allow you to generate that 20% data. So I would also encourage entrepreneurs to think of when you're going to an investor, that's your biggest risk, right? So you have this chunk of data that's missing. That is the risk they are taking for you and with you, because that's where they're putting their money. So be very careful that you have a good plan that speaks to the use of proceeds in this 20% that you need to generate. And that makes them more comfortable. You've identified the risk. You've told them what the risk is. You both make a plan together, and you decide what percentage of the company you're going to give up that's worth it for that.
So the largest sources of healthcare expenditure is directly linked with food, and diseases like cardiovascular diseases, cancer, diabetes, obesity, and it's something for which we don't even have to spend a lot of medical expenses, and it's something which can be cured even without drugs by simple means of lifestyle and diet changes. So as an investor, when things are coming up, it's always the investment that goes into the diagnostic or device or maybe the services part. But what do you feel about the preventative measure such as this? And if I have to speak about the data, 65% of the Indian population is young. Demographically, we are 35 years and younger, if that has to go on. So the nutrition plays a very vital role here, and it not only will increase the productivity of the country, but we will able to help bring these diseases lower in the future, right? So what do you think about the investments, and how should a health food provider actually can seek investment or continue or upgrade or scale up in that way?
I think it's a huge opportunity in India, because India is still very much an illness-driven market. It's not a wellness-driven market, and preventive is even further down the chain. And the bigger hospital chains and diagnostic centers, you're just overwhelmed with the volume of what you're doing, right? So even though everyone has their roadmap of doing preventive and wellness. It never really gets there, right? So I think there's an opportunity there. I would affiliate with the point I made earlier. I think that all the big bricks and mortar companies are focused on this. They don't have the resources or the capability to think about it. So, but they have the patient volume, they have the databases, right? They have the traffic coming through, which is untapped, right? So, for example, someone who comes to a Medanta would on a preventive basis or potentially be a patient you could target, right? So, I would affiliate with with the larger hospital chains, even the diagnostic companies, right? Very few people come for preventive checks. It's all about illness. The doctor prescribes the test and then they go. So, rather than wait for the paradigm shift in thinking, I would actually affiliate with these companies, and there can be many of them, because this is this is what they want to do, right? Because it takes down the cost of care tremendously. It allows them to address the volumes of patients they have, but they're not doing it today.
So I'm going, okay, a very quick question, because we're getting towards the end, and I wanted the panelists to comment on what they see as the exciting areas. So unless you want to forego that, a very quick question.
My quick question is, I'm Srilekha Reddy. I come from Washington, D.C. area. In U.S. market, there is so much focus on readmissions and average length of stay in the hospital. So I'm glad Apollo Hospital is building their own home health care and stuff. But I'll segue to the question of wellness market. So for somebody like me that is born here but was pretty much educated out there, if I want to do a wellness startup, focusing on very much of rehab services, because we do a lot of physical therapy, occupational, speech therapy services and stuff. What is the prospect in Indian market?
20 years back, we had the multi-specialty hospitals in this country. 10 years back, we have the single specialty hospitals like the dental, the ophthalmology chains. I'm only in the healthcare delivery I'm talking. In the last 3 years, maybe we have seen a lot of home healthcare agencies. The in-between, and then the other thing like the end of care. But in between is a large group called the transitional care in the United States. A combination of SNFs, skilled nursing facilities, and IRFs, inpatient rehabilitation facilities. My strong feeling is there's a big need for this kind of a transitional care between the hospital and the home. While a lot of investments are going into the home health care, I see some challenges at the home health care, but I see an opportunity in transitional care. You provide a home-like facility and some elements of home, some elements of hospital, and you may not recopy the exact models of the rehab care or Kindreds of US, but some kind of a hybrid model. My feeling is there's a big need. We see large number of stroke patients in this country, large number of polytrauma patients in this country. After the first 1 week or third day or fourth day, I'm sure Bharadwaj will say, discharge the patient out, we want the ALOS to be kept to 2.8 or 3.5, and where do they go home? They go home with paralysis, with a Riles tube, with a Foley's catheter, and I think there's a big need for that kind of a inpatient rehabilitation facilities in this country.
Thanks for saying that, but would the major hospitals such as Apollo support that concept? Because
I will tell you, there's one facility in Hyderabad, they're expanding to Bangalore. They target only 100 neurologists, neurosurgeons, orthopedic surgeons as their clients. Most of them want to refer because there's no place in this country. A very popular neurologist has said, Dr. Ramesh, we feel guilty that we are not doing enough for this kind of patients. So right now that area is open for, I won't even say disruption, just execute it, you will succeed.
So we're gonna pull the questions to more general so that those of you who are quiet in the audience also benefit from it. And the last tag end I will leave for questions that could be more personal, but okay, sir, but that's the last one. Okay.
My name is Ganesh, I'm from Yonda Innovation. We make empowered exoskeletons that support spine and the knees for the people with the back pain or the knee problems. Like these kind of products getting good traction in the US and Europe, but still it looks like it's kind of pre-time product for the India. So would you suggest anything to get good traction in India, or we should start with the out of India first, then come to India? Any suggestion for that?
That's like a political question.
My feeling is, I think we see this often actually in entrepreneurs only based in India with no exposure to overseas. Even though the market is big, can you conquer the US market there? There are already a lot of products there. Unless you feel my product is far superior than any US product, that's a different story. If your product is almost available in the US market, probably India is the right market actually. But we can take it offline and because this needs in-depth discussion.
Right.
Yes.
Do any of you want to comment to that? Should local companies go global in the beginning, or should they stay local? And then to Dr.
In fact,
Ramesh's
our
point-
fund, we have three concepts.
Okay.
Indian companies going after the Indian market. There's nothing wrong. There are some Indian companies in our portfolio going global from the day one. And there are some US companies targeting India as a market. So we invest in all these three types. There's nothing wrong in these. But you have to be very clear. An Indian entrepreneur trying to conquer the US market, he has to have the necessary skills to survive there.
Right.
The right team.
The right team, the
Yeah.
skills and all
So
that.
Honi-
Yeah.
The quality orientation is different. I think it's actually very difficult. I mean, I've seen it on the device side company. It's a the PowerPoint looks very strong, right? It's
Yeah.
a huge opportunity, and your price point is 1/10 of it. But actually breaking in is very difficult. I haven't seen many do it successfully.
I'm curious because of the questions. How many are from the US, how many from India, and how many from countries just outside either US or India? Indian companies, sorry, Indian companies.
Mostly.
Most, okay. US companies?
Oh.
Ex-India, ex-US? Ah,
Again, equal.
Yeah.
you can see how difficult our job is. It's
Yeah.
all across the thing. So what about, how about we keep it then, given that it's literally a 33% skew across these, how should we talk, because I'm assuming that most companies do want to raise financing. Let's talk about business models that make sense, right? What are the red flags that you would look at entrepreneurs who come to you when they are sizing the markets? In terms of thinking of what an ROI is to you all, are you all happy if it's a local market? Or do you at least want them to have the aspirations for going global? And then how much of legwork do they all have to do for that? Do you have a preference for one or the other?
I want to see U.S. market.
Okay.
That's where, and I think that the environment has shifted where folks can go from a concept through clinical trials and commercial launch without leaving the United States anymore. And so I want to see them with a plan to do that and do that as quickly as possible with the right partners in place. And then typically what we see is the U.S. market and then other, outside the U.S. in a broader sense. One of the mistakes that I see people make a lot and that I really pay attention to is really understanding the target patient population. Nothing drives, and it's just not me, nothing drives an investor more bananas than saying, like, wound care is $5 billion, and if I only get 2% over this time period, I'm like, what kind of wound is it? Is it diabetic, or is it venous, or, we're talking bed sores here. What is I want to know down to the minutia of that patient segment,
But
where you're really targeting.
Right, but let me ask you, for the benefit of all the ex-US entrepreneurs that are out there in the audience, if these entrepreneurs come to you and there is a market in the US, but it's impossible for them to figure it out by themselves, and you see that they actually have a good product that has potential in the markets, would you take on challenges like that for all the ex-US entrepreneurs here?
Yeah, if there's an opportunity in the U.S. and we can really partner with them to help them develop that product for the U.S. market, but come back to coachability,
Right.
And I do want to see entrepreneurs. I don't care what market they're addressing first, to really understand the unmet clinical need that they're addressing and what are the challenges and how are you going to get down to that specific patient segment where you're going to make a difference.
Thank you. And likewise to the Indian panelists, what about all the ex-Indian companies that want to come into India because they think there's a market? Every Indian who studied here and then went abroad and wants to come back, and they're just the ex-US, ex-India population. Would you all look at entrepreneurs like that who are trying to customize their products to the Indian market because it's a huge market, or would you give preference to your local entrepreneurs?
If that US person is based in India, that's a different story.
Okay.
Like the example I gave you,
Yes.
for example, was a fabulous product actually. He's sitting in the US, he wants the Indian market. Those could be challenges, like the Indian entrepreneur going abroad. My feeling is, if he wants to conquer the Indian market, whether it's an Indian or overseas, he has to be here feel the pulse of the, go to a city, a small town, a village, it's totally different actually. You can't ignore the ecosystem, how decisions are made, how the equipment is being used. It's easy to say the mobiles have penetrated everywhere, but still the bottlenecks in healthcare system are too strong. Many entrepreneurs underestimate the gatekeeper role of the doctors actually. We are the culprits as doctors. This technology doesn't work. If I say that, all my patients, oh, this doesn't work. So don't underestimate the role the physicians can play, the hospital administrators can play in using the technology.
Neeraj, do you want to comment? Same comments. Okay, could you tell the audience about when you're looking at CEOs of these companies, these young CEOs who we have out here, what are you looking at in terms of a skill set? What are the red flags and what are the things that you most like to see in them?
So, I mean, I think the skill set you're looking at is someone who has relevant experience, right? So, someone who's coming from the space who the product market thesis fits with the background they have, right? So, I think that's one piece which we look at. I think the second is you can figure out through enough diligence meetings whether they're willing to learn or listen, right? And sometimes people who, it doesn't mean that what one says from the investor standpoint, the institutional capital standpoint is always right, but you want someone who's actually absorbing that and has a response. Sometimes, to your point earlier, right, this whole thing about the market is 10 billion and I need 2%, that's a good enough opportunity, right? That's meaningless. Right. I think that's the second thing. The third is, and it's not just true for healthcare, it's true across startups. 95% of startups change their business plan over the first 3 years. So you have to be willing to learn, right? It is. I can tell you today it'll be unlikely that what you're starting out with is going to be the business you have 5 years down the road. So you have to be able to go with that. You also figure out from the people there. I worry a lot about where there's a very strong, definitive founder, and then the rest of the team just doesn't compare. You want like-minded people because it shows you're attracting great talent, right? Which is ultimately the scalability of the business. So that's the fourth thing we look at. So those are that would be true actually not just for healthcare, that would be true across sectors. I think in healthcare, the vertical experience actually matters more. The doctors are a very, very rigid and tight community, influential community. The regulators, the insurers, this is a very closed loop system, right? So you need people from this space, building companies in this space, right? In other sectors, you're willing to make the bet of the experience carrying over. I think here we would want people from healthcare.
And would you bet on a first-time entrepreneur? Not done this before, but has passion and energy and vision and just never run a company before.
Definitely. I mean, see, on the late stage side, you have enough proof points. But
you're tricky. But
on the early stage side, definitely. When we were doing it, we used to look at it. You have to. I mean, otherwise, you miss out on most of the market.
And so something I don't think we talk enough about, and what I've kind of learned over the last 6 years, and what I really am starting to look for, is leadership, right? And particularly with technical founders, that being a CEO, being a startup CEO, it's hard, y'all. I mean, it's really hard, and you have to make tough decisions, and you've got to inspire other people and inspire confidence in your investors. And I've seen technical founders really thrive in that, and others just fall flat. And so, I would encourage everyone out there who are founders and, part of startup teams to think about the kind of leader that you want to be and think about where your weaknesses and strengths are and really start investing in time in developing those skills, because I think ultimately, if you can position yourself as a strong leader, you will inspire the confidence in investors in driving things forward.
On those 2 points, I think excellent points. We see very early stage companies. We see around 150 presentations per month, around 1,800 presentations in a year. I see a dichotomy between the presentations we see from the healthcare and the non-healthcare. Maybe that point will be useful. If I see a very something on speech recognition and mobile, for example, the team will be typically 2-3 people. One comes from a strong computer science, artificial intelligence, machine learning. The second product will come from a strong sales and BD. The third person comes from a strong product expertise. That is a typical, the profiles we get, 2-3 founders of different backgrounds. Whereas healthcare, I see skew towards the technology. One person or 2 person, only science. The natural tendency, these are all long cycle projects. I'll bring on the sales and BD person a little later, a product guy a little later. That probably investors are still
That's a great point, yeah.
don't underestimate the importance of sales and BD, don't underestimate the importance of the product. Get those guys a little early. I do agree the complexity of getting those people. So that's one thing we see. On the second side, first time entrepreneur, second time entrepreneur, unlike in the West, we haven't seen too many entrepreneurial recycling. We haven't seen someone who sold a company for $1 billion and investing in 10 startups, or he's starting a second cycle, like App Dynamics. He already started, he sold his company doing a second startup. So that entrepreneurial recycling hasn't yet started. For all practical purposes, 99% we see first time entrepreneur when we bet on them.
So that's a huge interesting market dynamic difference, because in the US you tend to look at entrepreneurs who've done that before, and here the ecosystem allows for more first-time entrepreneurs.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay, trick question. The worst investments you've made? This is to entertain all of you.
We can't name names.
Profiling, you can keep the names.
One learning I've had is, and from an investor perspective, if you have some red flags with the entrepreneur, they never really become better. It either becomes worse or it stays the same. So you shouldn't kid yourself that the situation will improve, because if you look at the equation, before you invest is when the balance of power is mostly with the investor. Right? You have money, they're looking to raise money. So if you're not getting along at that point to believe that things will change over time, every time I've thought about that things will change, it's actually been worse. It's never really played out. So that's been one of my learnings, which is you have to pick up on those subtle signals along the way, right? And
you have to trust your spidey sense.
Exactly. Even though you can analytically convince yourself, it's a great business, I'll make money, and sometimes there are different pressures you face. But never, if you have red flags, then they generally become like bonfires by the end of your
So my worst investment.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because when we say red flags, is that mostly on a personal level, or is that skills, or what kind of red flags?
It's ability to listen. Very confrontational, right? Sometimes it's just chemistry, right? It's a variety of things, right? But you just like when you're developing a relationship with someone, you sort of get a sense about if this is going to work or not work, right? And like I said, this is the best it'll ever be. It never really. You have discussion, you have debates and disagreements over time over that 6.2 years of that exit horizon, right? It doesn't mean you agree on everything, but you have as an investor, you have to be able to work through the disagreement, right? And it's not about who wins or who loses, right? And you get that sense whether it'll happen or not early on.
So would you also say that's from the entrepreneur's perspective?
Definitely, that's very, very, very important. But to be honest, at that point in time, the entrepreneur is looking to raise money, right? And you have to raise money. We do not have to invest, right? And so we have the luxury of choice at that particular point in time, right? So I think it's true for both sides.
My worst investment, I would probably, from the fund I may not say, but from individual investments, I did one investment 10, 12 years back as an angel investor in one retail pharma chain. It got closed during the dot-com boom. But what's more important is I put my money as an angel investor, and after me, a couple of other boys put some money on into the same company. Once the company got closed, those people who put money after me, they put a criminal case against the founders. That's okay, but they also included me as one of the accused actually. In two cases, one case got closed. Luckily, they said, "Oh, you are not accused; you are a witness, and give me the witness. We remove the name." The other case is still continuing. So technically, I'm still accused as someone who deceived someone, even though. So that is the worst decision, and the.
Actually, you get more sympathy. Ours is a similar one. One of the portfolio companies that didn't do well was a husband and wife divorce, and the wife decided to drag the husband down, and all the investors got pulled in. So that happens more often than you would think.
I think for me, the common theme are arrogant founders and CEOs that do not take the advice of their investors and partners, and they get whether it's overall business strategy, I am right, I am doing this, or getting greedy on valuation, basically dragging out subsequent rounds of funding that prevent you from hitting milestones just because you don't want to give up more of your company, and sometimes you just have to do that. And you do have a window there, right, to get to market. And if you miss that window, the competition's tough, and especially in some of these innovative spaces that you really need to, having 75% of a company that's worth nothing is worth nothing. So just keep being aware of that.
Let's talk about valuations, because most of these companies are going to go ahead to raise their first institutional round. And how much do they need to worry about dilution? If you could comment on that. And then in setting the valuation, what is the skill set they need to have as a team? Do they work it always through legal counsel, or do you like to see an entrepreneur negotiating, having a very good idea of what their company is worth and starting the negotiations on a very educated, intelligent level, having that number in mind already?
Sure. If I have to take that question, my sincere request to the entrepreneurs is bootstrap as long as you can. Second would be get as many grants as possible. Come to someone like us only when there's no alternative. Don't use any chart accountant or a financial consultant to bargain between you and us. And in a very early stage, when there's no revenue and none of the Excel sheets will work, it's the trust between you and us. And you throw a figure, we throw a figure, and if you're comfortable, accept our figure. It's a mutual discussion. There's no science behind that. And we never do a deal if the entrepreneur is unhappy at the end of the day. And you should, same time, never do a deal if you're not happy with the expectations of what the investor has given. That's my answer in brief.
So, can you comment on this goal of convertible action?
The safe notes, the convertible notes. Sure. And I think the convertible note or the safe note is quite popular in the early investors, especially all the accelerators, incubators use that. But some of the early investors like us who bet on the teams don't believe in that. Why should I give a convertible note to you for $500,000 if you're giving a 20% discount at the end of 18 months when you're raising the next round? I can always come later. So most of the early stage investors don't give convertible notes or the safe. Unlike in the US, some of them give the convertible notes or the safe. So most of the Indian VCs, to my knowledge, don't give a convertible note or the safes. Maybe
so
others can.
Here's an interesting geographic difference. I would say that most companies in the US would raise money in the early stages through a convertible note or a safe. Dr. Ramesh is right. You need to make it worth the while for your early investors who are going to say, why the hell am I in it for a 20% discount, right, when everybody else, but it is a very favored instrument of valuation there because you can't set the valuation at this stage and neither can your investors. So it's the best 50-50 thing to do a safe. So it's extremely popular there, and that's a geographic difference. Tiffany, would you say
agree.
the same thing?
Yeah.
Right.
So in India, by the way, convertible instruments are actually quite difficult to structure, partly because there's some
because of the law.
Because of the law, if you're a foreign investor to an Indian investor, there's some valuation guidelines. There's sometimes an 18-month forced convertible timeline, right? So it's actually quite difficult to do it. So I agree with you that, especially from an investor perspective, if you're taking that risk, you'd want the returns as well. I guess a few other general guidelines for valuation. Dilution is obviously very important, right? There's no getting away from it, but it's also a demand-supply gap. There's no absolute dilution number which makes sense, right? If you're getting 3 term sheets, you can negotiate amongst those 3, right? I'd always make this a competitive process. I would never, even though much as on the investor side, I would love it when we're the only one talking to a company. From the company side, unless you're getting a fabulous investor, you should always have some competitive pressure to get the best deal for yourself. And then you made the point about, are you over-promising on the business plan? I think, investors are big boys as well, right? I don't think they're taking everything you're saying with as the gospel. And if you find an entrepreneur who doesn't believe we're expecting you to believe in the business 100 times more than we believe in the business. If you don't see that passion, then it's sometimes hard to invest. So I wouldn't, I guess I don't want to quote myself saying that, but I wouldn't worry too much about that.
Yes.
As you commented on convertible debt notes, could you also share about the geographic differences in raising debt versus equity investments between India and the US?
I can take the US, and Tiffany and I can take the US if you want to take India.
So the venture debt market is just beginning up right now. So especially so venture debt is just picking up, but they're tending to go with companies where there's significant equity cushion, right? I think venture debt is your startup funding source, and I wouldn't know whether you'd recommend it in the US, but definitely in India, it wouldn't be something I would look at very carefully. From an investor standpoint, you also worry about what is the enforceability of the contract, right? So it's not, I mean, having a lien on someone's property, and it's just messy, right? I mean, the last thing you want to do is spend 10 years trying to get your, get the contractual rights enforced. So in India, I mean, I've seen it pick up, but not truly in the early stage. And it's come more behind companies which are looking for some bridge funding to get to profitability, but there's a large equity cushion already in place.
And traditional debt is difficult. Bank debt.
And very expensive.
And I will say in the US, the classic mistake entrepreneurs make, because you have to have collateral, right, to your venture debt. And most companies will give, because you don't have the money, you don't have equipment, there's nothing you can really give as collateral. So entrepreneurs tend to give IP as collateral to venture debt. Worst thing to do, because if something goes wrong, the investor won't even invest in you because you don't have your IP and it's the only collateral you had. So it's frowned upon that. If you have as your collateral equipment or your lab, that might be a little bit easier to deal with than IP. The second thing to worry about is when you look at your cap tables, if venture debt is coming in on, venture debt is always superior to venture capital. You have to pay out the venture debt before, makes you very unattractive. So for those reasons, it's not this thing.
I would agree.
Is there an interest from the investors to invest in health food market, or that's out of focus?
I think in general, the bulk of the money is taking care of the tertiary guys, the secondary care guys, primary care. Preventive by itself throughout the world is not much. However well meaningful we are, we wanted to take care of the health of the population. It's a good story, but at the same time, wellness as an overall concept, some of the corporates are buying that thesis. But don't segment just food alone, you may have some challenges. Only lot of food, you're from India?
Yes.
Lot of food tech companies, so-called food tech companies which provide nutritious food on a subscription base already are there. Very crowded, very tech market. But you should expand as a overall wellness. Even there, we see a lot of companies there. So don't probably, my sincere request is of saying only food, maybe package it as a wellness in addition to food maybe.
I think for food tech, one thing, if you're doing food tech, is to figure out a way to capture the corporate market, right? So if you look at China versus India, the biggest difference is the corporate market in China is very, very big. And so the food tech companies, the food delivery companies have done very, very well. I think as a trend, it's the right trend, but in India, people have got stuck because if it's really a point-to-point kind of business you're building, it's very hard to scale. So if you can figure out a way to crack both the product, obviously, but also the channel, I think is important.
What about the Ayurvedic products? Everybody's talking about the services and all, and we're talking about reviving your science. So how do you get funding if you're focusing on that aspect?
I think it's a massive opportunity, actually. I think if you look at the Chinese...
But you know, to keep it presenting, but it's a concept which is very alien from aesthetic. So how is it that we could get somebody to help us take it to the next level? You know? Or, I mean, do any of you do it, or what's the way around?
I mean, we're later stage, but we actually have looked at some pretty interesting businesses on the late stage side in the Ayurvedic space, and you know what?
In mid or late stage, so when we've done a fair amount of population, we've done some clinical trials, we've done some licensing and great toxicology and all. How do you kind of take it to the next step to make it available to the market?
Why don't we chat offline?
Let's keep the detailed questions for no worries, just so that we get probably that I say, what do you think entrepreneurs get most wrong when they pitch to you?
So for me, they're focused too much on the technology. So for doctors and engineers, technical folks who are coming up with new medical products, they're very, very focused on the science part. And generally speaking, I don't care about that so much. I want to understand that there's a market out there for it, that somebody wants it, it's addressing a need. That's the biggest.
I've listed a couple of them actually, because you asked me that question before. One is underestimating the complexity of the healthcare ecosystem. Right. Many people say, I can solve this, but it's too complex. Even for us, pharma is different, biotech companies are different, Ayurveda is different, digital health is different, medical device is different, regulation, all that. So it's very complex. Don't trivialize the medicine, don't trivialize healthcare, it's very complex. The second is probably, at least from the Indian entrepreneurs, underestimating the thought leadership by publications in peer-reviewed journals. Definitely, that also they underestimate publications, and those are the 2 points probably.
So do the hospital infrastructure investors want to talk about medical tourism? And just so we keep it global, do you want to comment on, is that a business model that fits to, I'm assuming you meant from an India-centric angle, right? But we just keep it, if that's okay, to comment on, is that one of the more global business models? Do you look at that, or do you look at expansion for medical tourism in the Indian markets?
The perspective I have will be an Indian
Of course,
perspective, but
yes.
it is a great opportunity from India, right? Because the tariff rates on medical tourism is about 50% higher than what you get for domestic patients, and the government in India is regulating tariffs a lot more now, right? So they've regulated implants, they've regulated cardiac stents. In Karnataka, they've regulated tariffs, right? So I think medical tourism is a great opportunity. The business practices around medical tourism are highly suspect, right? So the sourcing of patients for a fee is a big issue, right? So I think you have to, from Medanta perspective, which we're investors right now, we do get patient traffic from abroad, but it's not as large as I would have anticipated going in, because the practices around that are very, very challenging, right? So, and that is one issue. So I think medical tourism is a huge opportunity. You just look at the price points, right? There's a huge difference in the quality of care at the tertiary care hospitals in India is as good as it is globally, but the channel to get it is very complex.
Yeah, same point. While we see a lot of so-called tech companies targeting the medical tourism, where they are finding challenges is the large world with so many countries, these local agents, because patients from Saudi Arabia or Bangladesh, they will not come to the platform and select a doctor. They always go to a local broker, and those unhealthy practices are somehow blocking the development of these platforms.
And for the entrepreneurs who are looking for areas within healthcare to start companies in, what have you seen as the hottest areas of investment? Because healthcare is so broad and there are pockets each with different ROIs. And I'll ask you both to comment from an India angle, and Tiffany, you want to lead with the use angle of the hottest sectors in healthcare.
So we're seeing a lot of activity in neurology, historically things that have just been classic med tech, cardiac implants, orthopedic implants, infection prevention, where people are integrating now sensor software data. And then kind of the next generation of that is the whole big data aspect that you mentioned, where I'd say a few years ago, everyone wanted to generate the data, but nobody knew who was going to pay for it and what elements of that data would be valuable. And so now there's even more convergence with the analytics and big data into EMRs to really drive patient outcomes. And someone brought up the readmission issue earlier. You know, how do we get patients out faster? How do we keep them out of the hospital? And what are the revenue models for that kind of expanded integrated approach?
Thank you.
On the healthcare services side, I guess 4 opportunities. One is what you were talking about earlier, the wellness and preventive opportunity, I think is very big in India. I think given the demand-supply gap, low cost models for whether it's daycare, whether it's home care, and is important. And I also think medical education, online medical education is a huge opportunity. You just look at the demand, which is a requirement of doctors and nurses, and you look at the attrition rates and the talent pool which is lost out to other countries. There's a huge gap, right? So to do that in a scalable fashion. And then lastly, I think healthcare services is one of the most antiquated business models, right? Why in primary or secondary care, why not do a consult for free and try to figure out a different way to make your revenue stream, right? No one looks at the patient over the lifetime of the patient. Everyone looks at an episodic appointment as the way to make money. So I think there's a huge change in business model which could happen. I don't think it'll happen on the tertiary or quaternary care because at that point clinical outcomes matter a lot. But on the primary and secondary side, I think there's a huge opportunity to do it.
Maybe if I have to make a bet, knowing the Indian talent, the gaps we have, life sciences, early stage pharma, biotech, new drug discovery, no. Probably another 10 years, 15 years before we are there. Medical devices, we are seeing some, but definitely able to enter the global market. Regulatory issues, maybe no at this stage. Hospitals, Neeraj has covered. maybe putting the skill sets of Indians, maybe I would bet on a few AI companies, whether in medical diagnostics, clinical medicine, AI in medical diagnostics, AI in clinical medicine, AI in drug discovery, AI and data insights. These are the 4 categories because I know the Indian computer science expertise in IT. Probably I see a good opportunity for the role of AI ML in these 3-4 buckets of healthcare. There again, psychiatry, it could be anything else, but I see these 4 areas within AI itself, which probably I see there's an opportunity, and we see a lot of traction and a lot of work, startups working in this area.
And I think it's a great point for the companies because if you look at the US, so do therapeutic companies here tend to be fewer in number? Because if I think from a US perspective, when you're thinking of your markets also, you have to look at the amount of capital that you need to get to the market, right? For companies with smaller life cycles like services, that's less, and maybe and therefore they stay more local. But therapeutic development, I mean, companies, if you look in the US, the average Series A has gone up. Companies are raising like 80 million for therapeutic companies. Do you see less of therapeutic companies?
For all, you can count people like Kavita's are very few in the country. And it's in the pharma, biotech is mostly we have the generics actually.
Right.
Specialty generics, which again needs large amount of money. But other than the specialty generics and vaccine manufacturers, the real life science discovery companies probably we are 10 to 15 years away from it.
Okay.
And what about, let's say, big health data? How valuable do you think are patient-reported health data? And so, for example, to detect the patient journey or the disease journey?
I think it's absolutely critical. A lot of people are focused on it right now. Really understanding the patient in his or her environment and how that's affecting long-term health, well, short-term and long-term health outcomes. The challenge is how to get the right data and how have all of that integrated and trustworthy. And then the regulatory implications of physicians making decisions based on that data, whether that's going to be regulated or not, depending on the regulatory authority. So it's complicated. But I think people who can really figure that out will have winners.
And I think Tiffany is absolutely spot on. And the only thing I would also add to that is the change in legislation, right? So hospitals are now penalized if you don't follow and you don't record patient outcome data and you don't track your patients. That penalty is being legally now imposed in terms of readmission, for example. So that increased this whole spate of startups that is focusing on this kind of tracking and patient monitoring, which was earlier not an area of investment. But as soon as these laws, ACA passes laws, you have this whole splurge of companies coming.
And it just makes it more complex because if you're taking your Fitbit thing that you got yesterday or my Apple Watch, or maybe I have a pacemaker with an implant, sensing stuff, and it's feeding all of that data, but what does the quality of that data look like? And ultimately, if you're using that as a clinical decision-making tool, it just opens up a whole host of issues from a regulatory standpoint, malpractice insurance, physician reputation.
So quality of data.
Absolutely.
Always. Okay.
So just to clarify, so from an investment point of perspective, I guess it is interesting to invest in these kind of, say, data-driven.
It is interesting. I would just be cognizant of the competition.
Yeah.
Any intellectual property that you would have, investors are going to. Everybody knows it's a competitive space, so really focusing in on what is your competitive advantage and how are you defending that.
Yeah, and that's the unique challenge. You have to rise above the noise. There's so much of noise in the system. We don't know how to pick the winners anymore because all the claims are the same. So you have to rise above that noise and differentiate yourself, and that helps. Okay, I am going to officially close down this panel now. Thank you very much.